With the budget of the 1926 naval rearmament spread out over a decade and not quite matching up to the Argentine Navy's ambitions for 3 heavy cruisers, a slight top-up was proposed in the early 1930s to allow them to get a 3rd cruiser of some kind. The Navy managed to persuade the government to release the needed funds by combining the roles of light cruiser, command ship and modern training vessel into a single design. Once more, bids were sought from across the world, and this time it was Vickers Armstrong who won, with a design that used the Arethusa class as the baseline and then expanded on it. The new ship was about 1,500 tons greater in displacement and somewhat longer than the Arethusa. It was actually only about 700 tons lighter than a Leander, with a standard displacement of 6,500 tons. Her main battery consisted of 9 6-inch guns in 3 triple turrets, a pair super-firing forward and 1 aft, with 4 single dual-purpose guns, 2 per side, and 8 single 40mm pom-poms scattered all over the ship. 2 triple torpedo launchers, 1 per side, and a catapult with facilities to support 2 small or 1 large seaplane rounded out the equipment. The triple 6-inch turrets were variants of those that were found on the early Town-class cruisers. Armour was 3 inches thick on the belt, 2.5 inches on the turrets, and 2.5 inches on the deck as well. Design speed was 30 knots, courtesy of 54,000 shaft horsepower driving 4 screws, although the ship was capable of a little more than that on trials. The ship was named La Argentina and laid down in January 1936, although the ongoing British rearmament programme slowed her construction somewhat, so although she was launched in March 1937, she only commissioned at the start of 1939. As a small British-built light cruiser, it's interesting to compare her to the Arethusas and the Leanders. As said earlier, she sat between them in terms of displacement, but had a larger main battery than both. Initial dual-purpose armament was exactly the same, and the light to medium anti-aircraft battery was considerably heavier, as the British ships would start life with 50 caliber Vickers machine guns in this category. The torpedo battery was the same as the Arethusas, with the Leanders having quad launchers, and the armour was actually superior to both British ships. The belt was flat out thicker than the Arethusas, and was identical to the Leanders, along with double the thickness of armour on the decks and double the thickness of armour on the turrets. The only real weakness was speed, being about 2 knots slower than the British vessels. Although admittedly she was laid down the year after the last Arethusa, and 6 years after the first Leander, given that the triple 6-inch turret was in development in the early 1930s, it's interesting to imagine a variant of this design that perhaps swapped out the school facilities for a little bit more machinery and quad torpedo launchers, which would then have given the Royal Navy the same number of hulls as the combined Arethusa and Leander class builds, but allowed for both uniformity of the ships and increased capability over either. In any case, La Argentina went on to serve peacefully during World War II, as Argentina remained neutral until pretty much the last minute. Then she received a radar set in 1946, and an anti-aircraft overhaul in 1949, with the 4-inch replaced on a like-for-like basis with twin 40mm Bofors, with single 40mm Bofors and over a dozen 25mm cannon replacing the pom-poms. Further radar upgrades were done in the 1930s, and during wartime she would have formed the core of one of 3 Argentine task groups, each centred on a cruiser, with 4 destroyers in attendance. However, she wouldn't see conflict, and as a training ship, she saw much of the world, considerably more in fact than most of the rest of the Argentine Navy, touring the Pacific, the Atlantic and the Mediterranean on multiple occasions, plus conducting a number of round-the-world cruises. This globe-trotting time ended in 1962, with the introduction of the steel-hulled, sail and diesel-powered ARA Libertad, which was a fully dedicated school vessel and thus could carry more cadets. After this, she mostly sailed the home coastal regions, although with the occasional overseas trip. By the early 1970s, she was seen as no longer required and duly decommissioned in 1972. Attempts were made to preserve her as a museum ship, but these unfortunately came to nothing, and she was scrapped in 1974.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.